welcome. Thank you for attending From Divorce Talk to Solution Talk. I'm your host, Tracy Wazinski, Business Development Coordinator over at TherapySites, and we are really honored to be here today. We want to give a special welcome to our guest speaker, Elliott Connie, and I'd like to personally welcome each and every one of you to this free educational event. During the next 60 minutes, Elliott will share with you the best ways to help couples in need. And at the end of the webinar, we'll hear from our web presence advisor, James Ravelli, over at TherapySites, and we'll have a live Q&A session as well. So if at any time you have any questions during today's webinar, please type those questions into the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will address as many of those as we can at the end. Also, after the webinar, there will be a quick survey to give your feedback, and we'd really love to hear your thoughts. So with that said, let's meet our presenter, Elliott Connie. Elliott Connie is a psychotherapist as well as founder and executive director of the Connie Institute, an organization that conducts training for clinicians interested in using the solution-focused approach with couples, as well as developing training materials and conducting research. A big welcome to Elliott Connie.
Hello.
Thank you, Elliott, so much for joining us today. We're excited to learn more about how to help couples and put these practices to use. So without further ado, take it away, Elliott.
Well, hello, everybody. I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. I'll give you a couple of things. During this webinar, we're going to be watching a video, and in order for sound to work appropriately, because there's really no way to stream sound directly to the video to your speakers in a quality way, the sound is going to be picked up by my microphone here and played back to you. So if you could turn your volumes up, because I'd like for you to hear what this couple is saying. This is a real couple. Really in my office, in my session. I have their permission to use this tape-in training and to make available for events such as this. But I would like everybody, if you happen to recognize these two folks, to respect their choices and their privacy. So as you see on the screen there, you can join my mailing list. One of them is at elliotspeaks.com, and that's a mailing list associated with me and tips for using solution-focused brief therapy. And then the connieinstitute.com, that is my training institute. So, I have no idea what just happened. Hold on. All right, I don't know what that was. There you go. Okay. So a little bit about me is I have a private practice here in Keller, Texas, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, kind of right between Dallas and Fort Worth. You know, one of the mid-cities is known as Arlington, Texas, where the Texas Rangers, and most people know about it for Six Flags and things like that, and I'm just north of that. I travel around the world and, throughout the United States, giving lectures on topics related to solution-focused brief therapy and using this approach with couples most often. I also very much enjoy working with adolescents and families, but most of the time I'm writing, lecturing, researching, and practicing this approach with couples. I've written 3 books. The first of my books is called The Art of Solution-Focused Therapy, and it was released in 2009. And my second book, which is one of the ones that led me into this work with couples, is called Solution Building in Couples Therapy, and that one came out in 2012, I think. And lastly, my third book came out last year, and that one's called The Solution Focused Marriage. And you can find those books on Amazon.com or my website, elliotspeaks.com. Basically, any place you can buy a book, you can find any one of those books. Most related to the topic we'll be talking about today, of course, is Solution Building in Couples Therapy, which is the book that kind of outlines this approach and how to apply it to work with couples. So I think we will start by asking a poll question, and I will send it over to one of our sponsors, James.
Awesome. Thank you, Elliot. So real quick, everyone, let's go over the poll super fast here. this is a poll for Elliot. He's going to go over the results for all of you guys after this. What is your biggest challenge in working with couples? So there's your 4 options if you guys want to take a quick brief read and everyone pick those really quick here. And also, I just want to introduce myself as well. My name is James Ravelli. I am with TherapySites.com. We're presenting and bringing this webinar to you guys. So TherapySites does provide websites for therapists with a complete package. Okay, we have the emails, the website, all the search engine marketing. And so Elliot's going to cover some great information on steps and how you're going to be able to practice, and TherapySites can help you so you can get those clients to begin with. So now that you guys have voted in the poll, I'm going to shoot it back over to Elliot really quick so he can go over the results and finish up. Thanks.
All right, I'll give people oh, the poll is closed. Wow. So, you know, couples therapy is unbelievably challenging. I have been literally all over the world. This year alone, I have lectured in 33 cities. And everywhere I go, I meet some of the most amazing, wonderfully, tremendously gifted clinicians. And they all kind of say the same thing. I don't like working with couples. And most of the time, that's because, you know, couples therapy is among the most challenging amongst any, you know, discipline of psychotherapy. And this is for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the one form of psychotherapy where someone you're talking to is guaranteed to be as hurt as they've ever been in their life, as angry as they've ever been in their life, and or as distant as they've ever been in their life. And that doesn't happen in family therapy or individual therapy or group therapy. It only happens when you're working with couples, which makes the dynamic in the room unbelievably difficult. It makes the dynamic in the room unbelievably challenging and could quickly lead to arguments and things like that. And as 41% of you said, one of the most challenging things we experience is when only one person is engaged in the therapy process. And just, you know, like everybody else, I experience a lot of those same things. And I'm going to show you kind of what we do in solution-focused brief therapy to kind of help with this scenario. Now, of course, because we're only talking for an hour, I'm not going to be able to thoroughly go through this approach. I typically do 2- and 4-day trainings, sometimes 1-day trainings. And in this case, I have about 30 to 45 minutes, and then the remaining time will be for questions. But I'll do my best to hit some highlight points and show you some video demonstrating the approach that I use in therapy and how it works when you're actually talking with couples. You know, me and my mentors, some guys over in England, Chris Iveson, Harvey Ratner, and Evan George, their biggest saying is do what you teach and teach what you do. So the only way that I can be congruent to myself and to that is to show video. So I hope that you guys get something out of this, and I'll do my very best to be helpful, and I look forward to spending the rest of this time going over materials and fielding questions from you guys. So without further ado, if I can make it work this time. There you go. Okay, so first I'm going to start off with a warning. Solution-focused brief therapy is very, very simple. In fact, it's so simple that it's complicated. It's really, really hard for our brains to believe that psychotherapy with such dynamic content and such complicated things happening in session can actually be so simple to practice. But this approach is really just about 3 things. What do you want? What does it look like? And what difference would it make to you if you had it? That's it. That is the essence of the solution-focused approach. We're going to be spending time in session asking questions that generate responses in these 3 areas, which means the number one skill a clinician using this approach needs to have is the ability to build questions in therapy, because questions drive what we do. You know, it's really important for a clinician to be curious and passionate and believing in their clients. When we say believe in our clients, we don't necessarily mean believe that our clients can get better, because I think that would be true for any clinician of any type. But we think the most important thing is to believe that our clients have the answer. And when you believe your client has the answer, you just keep building questions. Now, most of the time when we go about the business of learning how to practice psychotherapy, as a learner, we view it almost as a collection of techniques, right? Like I'm going to a CBT training or a solution-focused training or or a family therapy training, whatever, and we're building our, what my graduate school and many others I'm aware of refer to as a toolbox. But in this approach, I want you to view it as like a language that we refer to as solution building, and what we're building is our fluency with this language that has a question-based process to it. And one of the things that can make this approach very challenging is our questions are about what a client wants, something we call the preferred future, and how they will notice this preferred future, which means it's not necessarily about the problem. Now, I want to be very clear about this. Solution-focused does not mean problem-phobic. My original training is in cognitive behavioral therapy, and I remember expressing to some of my colleagues that I was going to start practicing in a solution-focused way. And some of my colleagues would say things to me like, I don't like solution-focused brief therapy because it ignores the problem. I'm not ignoring the problem at all. I'm going to show you what I mean about that in a second. I'm simply directing my questions towards what does a particular client or couple want, right? Problems can be tantalizing because sometimes they cause us to drift off of the goal of, they cause us to drift off of the process of asking what the couple wants because the problem sounds so grandiose that we need to focus on it. The problem sounds so scary that it scares us out of believing that simply by describing your preferred future, that change can happen. And there's a lot of research to support that by having conversations like this, it works. By having conversations like this, clients do in fact get better, couples do in fact get better. So it's important to us that we remember that this approach is about three things. What do you want? What does it look like? What difference would it make for you if you had it? And by sticking to asking questions like that and not being tantalized by the problem or scared off of the process that I'm engaged in, I am in fact doing good quality therapy to my clients. Why this thing keeps doing that? So because I don't have time to go through the whole therapeutic process and go through the whole method, I'm going to just show you three parts of this conversation, three things that we try to accomplish in the session. And then I'm going to use video clip to show you each of the three parts, have a brief discussion about what happened in the video clip, and then happily field questions. So the first thing is something that my colleagues over in London in a place called Brief refer to as establishing a contract. And that is we get provisions for our conversation that is led by the couple, and it's about the outcome for therapy, not the strategy. And what I mean by that is when couples come into therapy, they typically come because they've expired their ability to develop strategies to remove the problem that is troubling them. So most of the time when people are presented with a problem, the first thing they do is start brainstorming and strategizing on how to remove the problem. And once everything you can think of doesn't work, they come to therapy. But our our conversation is about the outcome of therapy. We say things like, what are your best hopes from therapy, as opposed to what brings you into therapy? Because we want to know, what does your relationship need to look like in the future that would cause you to know that therapy is no longer needed or required? And it assumes the couple is motivated. Couples come to therapy often saying things that make us think they're not motivated. So I might say, what are your best hopes from therapy? And a couple might say, I don't love him or her anymore. I've fallen out of love, or I don't want to be here. I'm only here so I can tell the children that I tried everything. I'm only here because I got dragged here. But the simple act of the couple walking into my office, I have to maintain my belief that they have the answer to the questions and they must be motivated by something. I was recently in Los Angeles and somebody asked me if I thought every couple ever is motivated. And of course the answer to that is no. But I think the couples who are not motivated by anything at all, I've never met them. They would not seek couples therapy. So it's very important that I maintain the assumption that they're motivated by something. And this is about something being present as opposed to something being removed or avoided. So very often I'll say to a couple, what are your best hopes from our talking? And a couple will say, we just don't want to fight anymore. But because fighting is, or not fighting is about the removal of something, we have to replace that. So two of the most important words to do this in solution-focused brief therapy are the word suppose and the word instead. Because suppose helps us imagine what we would be doing if this problem were removed. So suppose you weren't fighting. What would you be doing, right? So we use suppose to invite people to describe what would be in place of the problem. Or we use the word instead. So what are your best hopes from our talking? We don't want to fight anymore. What would you rather be doing? And it helps us have a present focus for our conversation. So again, we're after the presence of something as opposed to the absence of something. And it requires absolutely no understanding about the problem on behalf of the therapist. I don't need to know anything about the problem in order to engage in a solution-focused conversation. In fact, sometimes knowing about the problem thwarts our ability to be helpful in this conversation. And one of the reasons I think why this is super duper important is because very often when couples come into therapy, they're not in agreement on what the problem was. I just saw a couple this morning, about an hour or so before we started this webinar, where if you asked these two people what the problem was, they would give you two completely different responses. And that's not uncommon, as I'm sure most of you know, that couples come into therapy saying, well, we're in therapy because you're angry. Well, I'm angry because you don't talk to me the way you used to anymore. Or we're in therapy because of X, and that happens because of Y. But if I try to involve myself in that conversation, then it forces me to have to get them on the same page about the problem, which is a very difficult thing to do. It's much simpler, easier, and clearer to get people on the same page about the solution. So this approach does not require I have any understanding whatsoever about the problem. So for the contracting process, the first thing I want to do is I want to introduce you. Hold on, let me find where it starts here. So I'm going to introduce you to this couple by the name of Dave and Celeste. So I'm going to let this video play for about 2 minutes, and you're going to hear me establish a contract with each Dave and Celeste. I want to point out one thing is you're going to hear me ask each one the question. So I say, what are your best hopes? Dave decides to answer first. In this particular video, the camera that was on me actually malfunctioned, so you won't see me. So I will just tell you that you'll hear my voice. And when I say, what are your best hopes? I'm just talking kind of generally to the room. I don't want to talk to one or the other and accidentally lead one to talk versus the other. So I just kind of throw the question out there, and as a consequence of that, Dave decides to respond first. And I establish a contract with Dave, and I establish a contract with Celeste. So I want to play this little clip, and then I will have a brief discussion about what took place in the video. So again, remember, turn your volume up. I'm going to turn mine up as well, and hopefully sound works okay. But we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Hi guys, how are you? Good. My name's Elliot. You are? Dave. Dave, nice to meet you. And Celeste. Nice to meet you, Celeste. My name's Elliott Connie. Please call me Elliot. And do I have your permission to call you Dave? Mm-hmm. And I can call you Celeste. So what are your best hopes from meeting with me?
Not getting divorced and her putting her wedding ring back on.
Okay. So how did you know that we were having a conversation that was leading to you guys not getting divorced? Like, what would you notice differently happening?
To tell me that we weren't going to get divorced?
Mm-hmm. What would be happening instead?
Being happy.
Okay. When you're happy, what do you do?
I'm not pissed.
What do you instead of pissed, you would call that?
Angry.
And instead of angry, what would you rather have?
I'd rather I'd like to look forward to coming home. You know.
Okay.
I would like to look forward to being around her more.
And if we had a conversation that led to you feeling like you were looking forward to coming home as opposed to heading towards divorce, you'd be pleased.
Yes.
It would be a good thing. And so what about you? What are your best hopes from this meeting?
I don't feel very hopeful, honestly.
Okay.
I guess best hopes, like
Yeah.
waving a magic wand, and we would be friends again.
And if we had a conversation that led to you guys being friends again, you would be pleased? Awesome. Okay. Before we
Okay, so a couple of things I want to point out from that first 2-minute clip is, number one, I'd like you to notice how quickly we get straight down to business. Immediately walk into the room and introduce yourself and what are your best hopes from our talking. And the reason we do that is because we very much view that we're in a race with the problem. So if I sit there or if I say something like, what brings you into therapy, I'm going to get a lot of problem data that just causes the conversation to become difficult, get off track, so to speak. So I want to make sure the first thing that gets said is something oriented towards solutions, which is what are your best hopes from our talking, the implication that you do have hopes, and the conversation should be geared towards that future focus. Also, notice that I asked each one the question, so I would never let one speak for the other. So in this particular case, Dave went first. So I said, Dave, what are your best hopes from our talking? And Dave said some problem answers, like for her to put a ring back on and not get a divorce. Those are not answers, so I have to say, what would you rather see happening? Dave is really, really upset, but you could see him kind of change his perspective just that quickly to, rather than describing anger, I'll describe something else, which is, I'd like to look forward to coming home. Then I turned to Celeste, and Celeste, what are your best hopes? And I'm not sure you guys could hear it, but she said, I don't have any hope. But, as if someone waves a magic wand, I'd like to be friends again. Now, of course, I'd like to hear couples say things like, I want to fall back in love, and I want to fall back in love too. But Dave and Celeste, they said two things that work together. When you do this approach, it's very important that you work on something that's either identical, so the answers of each are the same, or can coexist. It is possible to have a relationship where one partner looks forward to coming home and the other one is friends again. That is a possibility, so we can thus have the conversation. So the next thing that I want to point out to you is something we call resource talk, or problem-free talk, actually. And this is a very, very important part of the therapy session, because it's the part of the session where we invite in people's resources. Very frequently, solution-focused brief therapy is known as an approach that focuses on exceptions. Well, this is one of the ways we invite the couple's exceptions into the therapy room and kind of show how it changes the dynamic in the room. And it starts with the beginning of the couple's positive feelings towards one another. The couple's relationship is so important because it's the very first relationship in their lives of this level of intensity that they get to play a role in creating. Like, I didn't have any say-so in who my siblings would be and my parents would be and aunts, uncles, so on and so on. But I actually chose my spouse, and I chose my romantic partners, and I played a role in how that would be constructed. So we get to ask questions about how they did that. And as a result of these questions, the couples are forced to take credit for those early feelings. One of the things that I find pretty incredible about couples therapy is people tend to give away the credit to something majestic or magical as opposed to taking credit for the construction of a relationship. So if I ask people, like, what led to the two of you getting together and having a wonderful relationship, people say such odd things like, I was just good karma, or I met him at the right place, right time. But the truth is, something absolutely wonderful about one person blended with something absolutely wonderful about another, and they use their skills to build a relationship, and I want to ask questions that get them in touch with that. And it's based on observations and actions. So these are things that if someone had been friends with you during that time, they would have been able to observe it happening because it was happening in real time right in front of people's eyes. And it's a time for me as the clinician to be taught by the couple. I went to school for a lot of years to learn to become a psychotherapist, but I didn't learn how to become Dave and Celeste's psychotherapist. Dave and Celeste have to teach me how to talk to them. Now, as I said earlier, the focus on this approach is very, very much about language. And every couple has a language with which they use to describe their love. And the only way that I could discover this language is by listening to Dave and Celeste and utilizing it. I mentioned earlier that I travel quite a bit, and one of my favorite places to go in the world is South Africa. And earlier this year, I got a chance to give a lecture in Cape Town, South Africa, And while I was there, I got to be a tourist for a little bit and go see Nelson Mandela's prison. And while I was at his prison, I heard a lot of stories. And the prison is now a museum, like the whole island, Robben Island is a museum. And the people giving the tour guides are people who actually served time, who are actually political prisoners at Robben Island. And this one gentleman talked about Nelson Mandela, how he taught himself the language of Afrikaans, which is what the white South Africans used to speak. And that upset a lot of Nelson Mandela's friends, or what he called comrades. And when they asked him why he was doing that, he said, because if you want to change someone's mind, speak your language. But if you want to change their heart, speak theirs. And as a couples therapist, I think that's absolutely true for us as well. If I want to help people's relationship, it would be in my best interest to speak the language of their love, not the language of my profession. So during this time of the conversation, I'm getting an opportunity to learn how to speak this couple's language, and they're going to teach me how to do that. So let me show you a clip of how that works. Let me find where we're going here. So this part of the conversation is often started off with the very simple, basic question of how did you meet? So you're going to hear me say, how did you meet? And you're going to listen to a few minutes. I won't play it for too long, but I want you to see a few minutes of the way this talking works. Now you can probably already tell that their body language has already significantly changed just from talking about what their best hopes were and beginning a conversation about their resources. Something has already happened to bring hope back into the room, which I can't go through that too thoroughly just because of the time constraints. But you will see how this process kind of picks up. And I ask the very simple, basic question, how did you meet? And as they describe their love, you're going to start to notice even more and more softening versus what you saw 6 minutes prior.
Any other questions? She was kind of in the middle, but.
So, how did you meet?
So I was doing a show, and she was kind of in the middle, but just because when you're on stage, sometimes you can't see the whole crowd. Mm-hmm. So she was right there at that line of lights, and she was the only person not laughing. Mm-hmm. And so, it bothered me. Everyone else is laughing, and she's not. And so afterwards, I went up to her and I was like, why were you not laughing? And why weren't you laughing?
Well, you didn't need my laughter.
That was what hooked me in.
So that's what hooked you in.
Well, it was like this giant. It was this giant. Like she became like this project where I'm going to make her laugh out loud. And I'm 10 years in, and I'm still working on it.
So, and you noticed her up on the stage, mm-hmm. and that stood out to you. When did you first notice him?
Well, before the show, I kind of saw him milling around. He wasn't talking too much with the audience or anything, but I noticed him and was like, oh, okay, it's one of the performers.
What stood out to you? I assume there were many performers around. Why did this one stand out to you?
I'm partial to brunette.
So that mean you thought he was good looking?
Good looking, yes.
Thought he was a good looking guy. And how did you guys meet? I mean, you saw him from a distance, you saw her from a distance. How did you end up meeting and talking?
Well, I ran after the show, I ran right to her. I mean, it was like, why? What's wrong? Are you deaf? Did you not see everyone else? And I was kind of, I mean, it wasn't mean or anything, but I was really like perturbed, and she did the whole, oh, you didn't need me. Everyone else was laughing. And I was like, yeah, why not you? But then there was definitely chemistry there. And then that's like this, I was like, well, can I take you out to dinner? And, I want to make you laugh.
Did she accept it? I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was, I felt though that she kind of accepted just to shut me up, but it was a real number. So it wasn't like 555.
Right.
2, 1, 3, 4. So it was real, and so
And you mentioned there was a chemistry there. How did you know?
Pheromones.
And how could you tell the pheromones were present?
Because
I blush.
I felt my stomach was in knots, and it was neat because it was like something I hadn't felt since high school.
Wow.
You know, that whole it's not newness thing, but I felt like a 13-year-old boy in high school. And it was also there was like, you know, there's groupies and everything, and you know, when you're up there and you're making people laugh, it's easy to get people's attention, and this was somebody who wasn't getting the attention,
right?
And this was like something I had to work for, and so I think that's maybe it was like this nervousness and like, oh my God, she's beautiful, and she's not throwing herself at me,
right?
You know, it's like I'm gonna have to work at this, and it was exciting.
And when did you notice the chemistry? Did you notice the same chemistry at this time?
It wasn't like when he came up to me, it wasn't immediate when he came up to me, but somewhere along the conversation when he was grilling me, and pursuing me, and I'm skeptical, or was, you know, but there was a little, you know, flutter. I'm like, okay, all right.
Is that unusual for you to experience a flutter?
Oh yeah.
So you received that as a good sign that there must be something going on between me and this brunette guy that was attractive to you.
Right. He's very forward.
Okay.
But not offensive forward, you know?
Yeah. And when you guys went on this date to dinner, do you remember where you went?
Yeah. It was Albernace. It's a nice steak restaurant. And it's kind of shitty on my part because it's a very expensive restaurant, and I know the maitre d', and so I got a really good discount. Also, it was kind of misleading to take her there.
Right.
And that was done on purpose. That was definitely done on purpose.
Kind of went over a little.
Just and.
It did kind of set an expectation.
Yeah, I would have been better off taking Carl Jr. You know, with my 10% coupon card.
Right.
And Albert Hayes, but it did the trick.
How soon after the initial meeting did the date take place?
I wanted like as soon as possible, but since I performed most weekends, I had to wait the following Wednesday.
Okay.
So.
And at what point did it hit you that this initial meeting and this connection, this chemistry feeling, the butterflies, Dave, that you experienced, and the fluttering, Celeste, that you experienced, at what point did you realize that it wasn't just that, like it was, I have a potential future with this person? At what point did that go on?
Prepared would sound foolish. It was probably after the salad.
Okay, so thank you guys for being patient and watching this video. You know, me and some of the people that I train with and receive training from, like videotape is such a huge part of our training because it's the only way to learn and observe therapy utterance by utterance. But what I want to point out to you about this particular clip is, now we're only, we're 12 minutes into the therapy session, and you can already see a change happen. But as a clinician, I'm asking very specific questions to invite loving feelings back into the room. The brain is a very funny thing. You can't have words and thoughts that contradict each other. Your brain can't do that. So when I ask them questions about their love, it's like an Ericksonian double bind. You either have to answer the question or hold on to the negative feelings, but you can't do both. This couple came along for the process. They came along for the journey. They decided to answer the questions while teaching me how to be their clinician. They said words like, Dave talked about his stomach being in knots. Celeste talked about her heart fluttering. They used the word high school feeling several times, and as they continued to describe their love in these loving ways and these loving words, that word high school feeling comes up multiple times. But during this process of therapy, two very important things are occurring. Number one, I'm learning to be their therapist. I'm learning the language they use with which to talk to them. The next thing I'm about to do is when we ask preferred future questions. And I'm now much more able to build questions that are answerable to them because I'll be using their words and answers to do it. People ask me a lot, like, what do you do when a client can't answer your question? And my response to that is always the same. Number one, I would never assume they can't answer my question. And number two, if they're having a hard time answering my question, it's because I probably didn't build a good enough one that would make them want to answer it. So I have to be very, very skilled in my ability to build questions and help them go on the journey that leads to their solution. Okay, so the next and final thing is I want to elicit future details. Something that is most known as the miracle question. My colleagues over in London at 3 refer to this as the tomorrow question, and I agree. I like that wording much better, and you'll see why. But it's the realization of the couple's best hopes from the work. And the task is to help the couple consider and describe what their lives would be like in specific detail. The more details, the clearer the picture, thus the more likely the couple is to make changes in their lives. Our words guide our actions. So if I ask you questions that guide you towards this preferred future, and I use really, really specific points in the questions, then you're much, much, much more likely to experience a change. Remember how important your brain is. You cannot hold two competing thoughts. As a consequence of that, as you start describing your preferred future, in a weird way, your brain begins to experience it. You know, details are so important to the brain that if you describe something in enough specific detail, your brain starts to develop synapses as if it's actually happening, and thus loses a sense that I haven't already done this thing, which makes doing it in the future more doable. This is exactly why people who have experienced a tremendous trauma don't like coming to psychotherapy, because in order to come to psychotherapy, I'm going to have to tell that psychotherapist about my trauma, and talking about it in specific detail invites my brain to re-experience it. And we don't want people to do that. We want to invite their brain to experience a hoped-for future. So now remember, the couple just taught me how to ask them the miracle question. They taught me how to ask them future-focused questions. So I'm going to jump ahead a few minutes, and I want to show you how I use their language to ask their question. I'm going to play a little bit of what their responses are. So you listen to why we call it tomorrow questioning. It's because the miracle question is not just a question. People often say, "Oh, I love the miracle question. It's a great goal-setting question." But the miracle question is not a goal-setting question. It's the most important content question of the solution-focused session. But by the time we get here with the couple, I'm now better at asking them questions because they spent some time teaching me words that I should be using, and they're much more likely to answer the question because I'm directing the question specifically to them. Whenever you customize a question, people are more likely to answer it because the very way you build a question makes the client or the couple feels like you're answering them or you're not answering them. You're not listening to them. And because I'm going to use their words in my questions, it feels like you're paying attention and listening to me, which makes the couple feel like they should pay attention and listen. So I'm just going to play a couple of minutes, and then I will say a little bit about that clip, and then I'll be quite happy to take questions. Okay?
Contact me. And instead of the sleep, I'm here for you or something. What an unusual question to ask the two of you. Suppose tonight, as you were asleep, a miracle happens that wiped away all the problems that caused you to contact me. And instead of those problems, that high school feeling was brought back, where you felt like her protector, and you felt safe. Those high school kind of butterfly feelings were back, and that high school very fluttery feeling was back. Just like that, this miracle occurs overnight as you were asleep.
But because you're asleep, you can't know that it happened, right? I mean, how could you? You were sleeping. When you woke up the next morning, what would be your very first clue that something was different? That this feeling was back.
We'd be spooning instead of on the edge of each, the other side of the bed.
Mm. And at what time would you wake up?
It wouldn't be, but I mean, there would be daylight. It would be like 8:30 in the morning or something.
And if you woke up at 8:30 and noticed that we're spooning, that would be the first thing you would become aware of. Something was different. Jay, what about you? What would you know?
She'd kiss me to wake me up.
Where would she kiss you?
In the lips.
And how would you respond to this kiss from her to let her know that you recognized it?
I would do my favorite kiss to her, which would be on her neck.
And how would you respond to this? To let him know that you had noticed this difference.
Probably wrap my arms around him, kiss him on the lips, and pull him close.
And would this be an unusual way
Yes.
for the two of you to start a morning? How would you let him know that this unusual start to the morning you thought was good, you were pleased by it?
She'd make me breakfast.
I'll get to that in a second.
I wouldn't stop. I would be responding.
And that would be a clue to him?
I think so, yeah. I used to kiss him right off the ear. Like real soft.
Right. Right.
He like that. He knows exactly what that means.
Oh.
That's, yeah.
Sex time.
Okay, I'd love to let you guys listen more and watch more, but we're running short on time. So as you can see, I think you could get the point of the very detail specific questions I'm asking to help them in a very rich, in a very comprehensive way experience and describe this preferred future. And they go on to tell me, like, after this, Dave would cook Celeste breakfast. Then they would sit on the couch and hold each other. Then they would plan a date, go on this date, and how they would re-experience this relationship. Then at the end of the session, instead of me giving homework, they talked about what they would do, and a tremendous amount of progress occurred for this couple. But that's what this approach is about. So stick to it and trust the process and your client, because that is the way change happens. So I guess I'll send it back to our sponsor and we'll take some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Elliot. So again, really big thanks to Elliot for all the information presented. The videos were fantastic. Your audio was great. Thank you again. Really quick, guys. Again, my name is James Ravelli. I am over here with TherapySites.com, and we'll get to the questions in 1 second. I just want to give you guys a quick brief overview. So TherapySites provides that complete website package for anyone, that has a small practice, a large practice, a group practice. We're going to have the website created for you with all the default content already in there, an easy-to-use editor. You're going to get all your emails you can use. We're going to do all the search engine optimization for you. We're going to take care of all the technical work, right? You can book clients online. All this is going to be possible with TherapySites. And it's only $59 a month. There's no contracts. There's no setup fees, right? Our goal is so you can focus on what Elliot talked about. You guys can be good therapists, right? And we will take care of your websites for you. We'll do everything you need, and we'll make everything happen. And you can go through and make easy changes on your own, and everything's going to work out great. So we also give you 6 months free in the psychologytoday.com directory if you're not currently a member. So there's quite a few benefits by just giving this a test drive. And if you want to switch to the next slide really quick as well for me, we're going to have, for the first 20 people after the webinar here that want to give us a call or email me, you can call 866-288-2771. We're going to give 2 months free service. So even if you have a current website or you don't have a website yet, you want to build your practice, you have a good sized practice and you want to maintain that, right, with our online scheduling, our email widgets, everything else, go ahead and shoot us a call. We'd love to discuss that with you. We'd love to go over any of that. So the first 20 folks, we're going to give 2 months worth of service for free. That's, again, no contracts, no commitments, nothing of the sort. Just give us a test drive. So at this time, guys, I'm going to pass it over to Tracy, and she's going to go ahead and do some questions for you guys, and some questions came in for about TherapySites and then for Elliot, and so we'll get all of those handled.
Yes, thank you, James and Elliot, for all that great information. We did have a good number of questions come in, so I'll go ahead and get that started. The first question we have is for Elliot. Someone had mentioned that this couple seemed pretty well behaved and seemed to do well in the session. How do you get with someone to how do you work with someone who gets enraged or antagonistic, or gets to work with somebody who will not participate?
That's a really good question. I get that question a lot, and I will answer it like this. You know, one of my favorite TV shows is a TV show called Survivorman. I don't know if you guys watch the show or not, but it's about a guy who survives out in the wild, and one of the things he always has to do is find materials with which to start a fire. And he's always looking for the appropriate materials, dry tinder, something he can make a spark with, things like that. So when I'm in the session with a couple, you know, I would describe me as bad materials for a fight, because I'm going to keep asking preferred future, best hope, resource-oriented questions, and it becomes very difficult. Like, that couple was well behaved, at least in part, because of the nature of my questions. If you remember from the very beginning, Dave was pretty ticked off about her taking off the wedding ring. I could have asked the question like, what happened to cause her to take the wedding ring off? And that would have caused more of an environment for a fire. That would have been more good tinder and a spark. But instead I said, what would you rather see happening? And that causes us to drift in another direction. But I will say I'm very aware that sometimes there are couples that are harder to direct these questions to. And a solution-focused therapist has to be the person in charge of the conversation. We're not in charge of the content necessarily, but we're absolutely in charge of where we direct each question and who we allow to interrupt. We do something called solution-focused tennis, where each member of the couple is allowed to take their turn in the conversation. As you noticed in each of those clips, I was directing questions at both and eliciting descriptions from both. So if one person interrupts the other, it's my job to stop them and say, it is not turn to talk. And if one person refuses to talk, it is my job to elicit it, and in essence say, it is your turn to talk. And once you begin to orchestrate the conversation like that, couples usually get on board and just continue to talk.
Great, thank you, Elliot. The next question we have is for James. So for TherapySites, can I use an existing domain name?
Yeah, that's a cool question. So for sure, so TherapySites can either purchase your domain name here for you, or if you already have a website or already have a domain name, we can help get that transitioned in. There's no extra cost either way, and we'll definitely assist with that.
Thank you, James. And then for Elliot, the next question we have is, what information do you have about the couple before you meet them for the first time? Do you do a background session? Do you have them fill out forms online? What kind of information do you have going into the session?
Well, I work in private practice, so the information I have is just the intake paperwork they need for my private practice. I do not do an intake session. The session you just saw was my very first meeting with them. And I prefer it that way because I don't want to be swayed by the problem or information or things like that. So the packet that they fill out, they can find it online, and they print it, and they bring it to their first session, and then away we go doing what you just saw. You literally just saw my very first interaction with them.
Great, thank you. So the next question is for Elliot as well. Would you do the same thing and the same process for couples who came to see you for infidelity issues?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely I would. Because sometimes because of the nature of the conversation that we're having, I don't necessarily know what the problem is anyway. And it absolutely could be the case that Dave and or Celeste did have an affair with someone. I have no way of knowing because I start off by saying, what are your best hopes from our talking? Unfortunately, infidelity is something that happens in the world, and a lot of people come to my practice because of it. But my job is to do the type of therapy that I'm trained and skilled at doing, and there's a tremendous amount of research that supports the efficacy of this approach. So I absolutely would do it regardless of what problem brought the client into therapy. There's never been a research project that says one particular problem somehow does not benefit from this approach to therapy. So yes, I would do this just because this is what I do.
Thank you. So the next question is for you as well, Elliot. How do you engage a couple in this type of interaction with a couple that rebutes the idea of love? They're discussing getting together just because they felt it was the right thing to do. They're doing it for their family or for other type of reasons.
I would assume that they got together for a good reason, because couples will say things like that to me all the time, like we got together because so-and-so got pregnant, or we just thought it was the right thing to do. Now that might be the explanation of how you got together, but that does not explain how you kept it together. And I'm going to ask them questions about what skills they each have and utilize that cause them to keep the relationship together from its earliest origin point to the time with which I'm meeting them.
Thank you. So the next question we have is for James. I have a group practice as opposed to an individual, and I work with some alternative therapies as well. Will TherapySites still work with me?
Yeah, great question. So, of course, for sure. So TherapySites is very customizable. We can work with the individual therapist, the one, the two, maybe a partner group. We can also do a really large group. So we have a few groups that are like 20 plus. We have even a couple that are 40 plus. Some big regional groups, they have 3 or 4 different offices. So our sites are very customizable, just like any website, and our staff here can help you get those optimized and customized for how many you need, and we can set up multiple calendars on your site as well, so each individual therapist can have their own calendar for booking online.
Great, thank you, James. The next question we have is for Elliot. So what would you do if the couple is not responsive in part 2 of what you discussed and negative feelings are shown only? Would you make the miracle question anyway?
That's a really, really good question, and it's such a rare phenomenon because people want to describe positive things, and there's a clip you missed between part 1 and part 2, again, just because I didn't have time to show the whole thing, that kind of reduces the likelihood of that happening, which is why a question like how did you meet is such a non-invasive, positively oriented question that most people start telling the story without even realizing that they're telling the story. So I probably would not ask the miracle question until, number 1, we were having a positively oriented conversation, and number 2, I felt like I was picking up the language that makes sense to this particular couple.
Great, thank you. So this looks like we do have a lot of questions coming in. This looks like it might be around the last one for James, and it's kind of a 2-part question for you. So what kinds of features does TherapySites have to help me manage my practice in addition to having the website? And is the $59 all-inclusive for the service?
Yeah, so to start back from front here, the $59 is all-inclusive. So if you need lots of search engine optimization work, you're in a high-traffic area, New York, Los Angeles, it's always going to be the same price for you. So we streamline it, no extra fees, no setup fees, nothing hidden. So it's always going to be really slick on that front. In terms of extra features, some of them I mentioned earlier as well. So we have an online scheduling widget now, which was more recently added. So folks can go online and they can book sessions with you. It's really, really helpful if you're a smaller practice, you're the individual, there's 1 or 2 of you. It's great for larger practices as well, but it really helps while you're in session, people can be booking with you, because in these times and days, people go through Google, they search, they find you, they call you, you don't answer, next therapist, next therapist. They just go through the list. This way, at least, they can engage you, they can, you can get their contact details, and everything can book online. On top of that, we also have an email campaign widget as well through MailChimp, and it works really good if you have, products to sell, you want to push your book, you want to say, push any kind of new products you have. It's also really handy for updates, so you can have all your current clients on there and say, hey guys, I'm taking, a month-long sabbatical, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to be off. It's really helpful for being informative as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Tracy here, and so you guys can get back to Elliot's questions also. But just as a heads up, everyone, for the first 20 folks on the webinar today, after the questions are over, we're going to do 2 months free of service. There's still no contracts with that. The number, we're going to leave it on the screen, and the email, you can contact us, and Elliot's info is there as well. So I'll pass it back to Tracy really quick so you guys can go through more of your questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, James. So yeah, we have a good amount of questions coming in for Elliot still. So the next one for you, Elliot, would be what type of homework would you give this couple? And a lot of different therapy sessions, therapists will leave the couple having some things to do after the session. What would you suggest for this couple?
In this particular session, in my work, the suggestion is typically just as simple as asking the couple to notice the presence of the details we've been discussing throughout the session. I asked this couple, is there anything that they would like to see happen between sessions 1 and 2 that would help them move more towards their preferred future? And they assigned themselves homework. Dave said that he wants to talk to her more and he will be more physical. And Celeste said that we need to be more part of the same orbit. And I'm going to focus on making sure we're no longer as separate orbits, that we're functioning as a unit. So, but the simple answer is our conversation usually ends with something just as simple as go notice the details of what we discussed in the conversation.
Great, thank you. So the next question we had come in for you, Elliot, is do you have a specific strategy when working with a couple and one of the partners is narcissistic?
It's funny. I was just in LA last week and I got that exact same question. I would continue to do therapy the way outlined by our approach. And again, I wouldn't have any way of knowing that they're narcissistic at the beginning of the session. And I probably wouldn't think about them in that way as I was going through the session. So I would just keep doing therapy in the way that I'm trained to do, using the client's language and building questions towards this person. And whatever their responses were would guide the level of questioning that I'm asking them. But at the time with which I met them, I wouldn't have a way of knowing that. So I would just keep doing therapy the way I do it. And even as therapy was going on, I wouldn't think of them in that way. I would just use the information they were providing in therapy to build more questions.
Great, thank you. So the next question for you is, what if abuse is present?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question and a hot topic in today's news cycle. There is a tremendous amount of research being done at the Ohio State University by a woman by the name of Dr. Mo-Yi Lee. And she has done years of research demonstrating the efficacy of solution-focused and strength-focused approaches in working with people when domestic violence was either the trigger for coming to psychotherapy or currently happening in people's lives. And I mean, it's a scary thing, no doubt. So the first thing is making sure that the people are safe. Like, you couldn't do therapy of any kind if somebody in the room was unsafe. And the second thing is, once safety is assured or attended to, again, I would just continue to do solution-focused therapy as I do it and trust that the couple can answer questions in the same way and build a preferred future that does not have domestic violence concerns, issues, or behaviors as a part of it.
Great, thank you, Elliot. And it looks like we are coming up on the top of the hour. However, we do have a lot of questions coming in, so we're going to, keep going through these questions so we get everything answered for you guys. Remember to reach out to James and run TherapySites if you are interested in that 2 months free, and stay on board if you have questions. We'll continue to go through them and continue on with these. So the next question we have for Elliot is, do clients ever give completely incompatible responses, such as, I want to get back together, and the other one says, I want to get a divorce or a civil divorce?
Sure. People give completely incompatible answers, and we have to keep working with it until we have conjoint answers to the best hopes question. So if I said, what are your best hopes from our talking, and one person said, I want to get a divorce, and the other one said, I want to stay together, I would ask one, let's suppose you did get a divorce, what do you hope it would do to your life? And they would say, well, I'd feel free, I'd be happier. Okay, so if somehow our talking led to you feeling free and being happier, would you be pleased? Yes. And let's say you guys stayed back together. What difference would it make in your life? I'd be saying this to the other partner. If you guys stayed back together, got back together, what difference would it make in your life? and that person would say, well, I would be happy, I would have joy. So now that becomes the content of the conversation. Instead of, are we going to get divorced or not, the conversation is about recreating happiness and freedom and peace and those types of things. And it's my job, at least in my opinion, to have a conversation oriented toward people's preferred futures and re-invoke resources and positive feelings. And what couples do with the presence of those resources and positive feelings is really none of my business.
Great, thank you. So the next question we have is, and you touched a little on this, I noticed, but someone did ask, is this typically how the first session usually goes, or does it vary a lot? Can you speak a little bit more about the first sessions and how they typically go?
Yes, this is very, very common for a first session. The questions vary because, as you hopefully noticed, I was building my questions based upon the responses I was getting from the couple. But it's the same process in all first sessions.
Great, thank you. So the next question we have is, are your intake questions also solution focused? Like, do you ask about the history, problems, symptoms on the forms?
No, I do not ask about the history, problem, symptoms on the form. I would say that my intake forms are very legal and not so much assessment. So I don't ask any history, problem, assessment type questions on the form. My form is just the legal kind of consent form that you would find in any therapy practice.
Okay, so then this looks like it may be the last question unless anybody jumps in after this one, but otherwise this looks like it's going to be the last question for the webinar, and then we will conclude. So what techniques do you use in Solution Focus to give couple tools to process conflict effectively?
I wouldn't say that I give any tools to couples to help them process conflict effectively. I would say that those get dealt with through the therapy conversation. Now, we only showed in total about 6.5 minutes, 7 minutes or so of therapy. But had we had the opportunity to watch a whole session, you would have seen the way that the tools start being invoked. But it more happens with the couple bringing up the tool, and then I ask questions to highlight its efficacy through a process that we call amplifying. So my questions amplify the presence of these positive tools, and they more do the grounding on the tools as opposed to me teaching them how to resolve conflict. And unfortunately, I couldn't show you that in the videotape because we only got to see such a brief clip of it. Is that it?
All right. Well, that looks like that covers it for the webinar. Thank you so much, Elliot, for having us here today and really joining us on this webinar to share your expertise. If you do have any additional questions, we have Elliot's information up on the screen, so feel free to reach out to him with any more questions you do have. And if you have any questions for us at TherapySites, feel free to reach out as well. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.